going live. We'll leave a few seconds to make a show out of this. And I have the distinct pleasure to spring on this on Matt Waldman. Earlier tonight, trade. Houston sends the number 57 pick for a 2022 fourth round pick and Brandon Cooks. Now a Houston Texan. As Cecil would say, we love you, Cecil. We miss you. React to me.
Well, it definitely tells you that they wanted to get a known thing after they gave up a known thing.
Right.
So that tells me that's a bit of if you're a pessimist, it kind of says we're admitting that we made a mistake giving up to Andre Hopkins. As Mark and I were discussing on my show earlier, which is why would you give up a known thing for a second or third round draft pick as a wide receiver, even in this rich class? So they're trying to make up their ground on that, but they got a player who's not a good contested ball catcher. That's not really Brandon Cook's game. I mean, Brandon Cooks is a speedster. Brandon Cooks he's kind of a mixed bag when it comes to the contested plays, and he's a good player. I mean, he's a very good player. But he's a tier down from DeAndre Hopkins. So, they still have a net loss in all of this, if you ask me, because they don't have the kind of player DeAndre Hopkins was on their roster anymore. So I'm like, okay, that's a nice ad for a player, but it still has me thinking about, it still has me thinking about the original in this. I can think of some really crude analogies, but I don't think I really want to go there. So it's
right.
kind of like, so I mean, you can insert your own, but just think, I guess it's almost like losing your wife and then like deciding that dressing up a mannequin and having them ride around in your car is like, a good replacement. And it's like, I hate to call Brandon Cooks a mannequin because he's a very good player, but it's just not enough. You're not really like, you're still thinking about the original loss.
Right. In both cases, it's interesting because analogies, I love them. You love them. Both of these teams, the Rams and Texans, are different snapshots on the arc of when franchise building goes wrong, right? It seems like Sean McVay is on the oops side of it. I'm going to read there were some excellent tweets. I feel like because everyone's just sitting around like the Twitter work, like composing tweets. It's just been excellent. Rich Hammond, who is the Athletic beat writer for the Rams. And I think Athletic's free for the night. And if you haven't checked out the Athletic, it's really good. Quality of work there is excellent. He says all these things happened with the Rams in a 6-month span in 2018. Cooks trade and extension, Peters trade, Talib signing, Roby Coleman extension, Sullivan extension, Joyner franchise tag, Sue signing, and Gertz all within 6 months. All gone. Every single one of them. In 2018, we're not talking ancient,
Yeah.
We're talking about 2 seasons ago. And I think that Sean McVay, they went all in, and Sean McVay is having the realization moment like, this didn't work. So they accelerate and take this huge cap hit for Cooks, right? Because you look at the commodities, he's 26, but he's on his 4th team now, and we have to wonder, and the concussions, 5 concussions last year, halfway through the season, we were wondering how much Cooks could really contribute going forward. But you bring up, that's where I think we should go. And there's a financial element here too. Look, Cooks is getting $8 million this year, 12, 13, 14 the next 3 years. He is only 26. And those are reasonable prices if he plays up to previous levels, and all non-guaranteed. So, I mean, still, you're giving up a 2nd-round pick, though. I mean, for a 1-year rental, they really the trades. I collapse them down, Matt, and you collapse the trades down, and basically they moved up from 57 to 40. They got Cooks and they got David Johnson, and they got a 2024 from the Rams, which is like far off on the future. Who cares if it's a 4th-round pick 2 years from now? And they gave up Hopkins, and they also delayed a 4th-round pick. They gave one to the Cardinals this year, and the Cardinals are giving them theirs next year. But whatever, they basically traded Hopkins for Cooks and David Johnson, which is just, I mean, it's unthinkable because, as you said, Hopkins can do so much more than Cooks. Plus, you have like the ramp up factor and the chemistry factor with the quarterback. So my brain races when I think about all this stuff, Matt.
Now, here's the thing. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
The thing that
I have a question I want to tee up for you.
Yeah.
Because it all seems to me like Deshaun Watson, right? Bill O'Brien comes out earlier this week and just says Hopkins wanted a raise. We didn't want to give it to him, so we traded him. Which to me is like announcing to the team, like, if you ask for more money here, just ask for more, And who knows what's been. But is Deshaun Watson going to be a Houston Texan in like 2 or 3 years? And if he's not, this is the fun part. Where would you love to see Watson play? What coach or organization would you love to see him play in?
Honestly, I'd love to see him play for the Raiders, because Mariota's not going to work out, and Carr's going to be like moving away, giving the stink eye to his neighbor pretty soon.
Yeah.
So to me, Watson would be good, because he's the kind of player that after all this goes down, he's going to look at John and go, "Come on, John, just shut up and let me do my job. Just go away, and give me all those big, hefty guys on the offensive line that you like to get, and I'm going to have a nice offensive line. We're going to get Josh Jacobs maybe in his second contract, maybe, or another good running back at that point. And, and he's going to do just fine. He can be the Rich Gannon that that John Gruden's been searching for. To me, the bigger thing that's interesting from a fantasy perspective about this trade is a guy that I've often liked, that I've liked for a long time, who's might get his chance if they don't draft a wide receiver with the Rams, and that's Josh Reynolds.
Yeah,
and Josh Reynolds has shown that he can play. Josh Reynolds has shown also something that showed something at Texas A&M that we haven't seen a lot of with the Rams, because they let him run a lot of inside routes with the Rams, but he goes up and wins that ball. He's a better ball winner than Brandon Cooks has ever been.
Right.
So if they give him opportunities to play on that range of his game, above the rim, he might be a bargain this year.
Yeah, and he's playing for a contract. He's playing, and he's gotten snaps. They can see what he can. They've seen what he can do. So yeah, that's interesting. Because the natural move is 12 personnel, and just this week McVay was talking up Gerald Everett, saying that he'd do a better job of getting Gerald Everett involved. And if you look at the first half of the season, Everett was actually the more productive tight end. Not to take away anything from Higbee and his amazing finish to the season, but they're both formidable pass catching tight ends.
Sure.
And of course, Higbee is a good blocker, and that's unfortunately in fantasy football sometimes being a blocking and receiving tight end can end up working against you, and it might here. But with Cooks and Hopkins, one of the things I want to put another spotlight on that you illuminated, and you and I remember met in the woods with Cooks because of the game he had against Ifo Ekpre Olumu. And I know you're going to remember exactly what I'm talking about, because you could see that a longer, more aggressive corner who was willing to try to dictate things to him, he didn't have a way to escape that. And KJ Hamler's popping into my head, Matt. Like just players that you can tell when it comes time for a clash on the field, they shrink. And Cooks isn't necessarily, it's not fatal, but Hopkins is the exact opposite. Hopkins kind of reminds me of like the Predator or something out there, but the way that he's dictating the game to everybody and everything around him, and Cooks just doesn't add that. Maybe it's fuller injury insurance, but where the Rams and McVay have said, well, we pushed, and Texans are pushed. Field Yates posted like the accumulation of all the picks and players they've traded and everything they've gotten back, and it's terrible. Bill O'Brien is like that Waldman thing, mismanagement, right? You can see it all through the organization. So interesting though, and maybe the Texans don't take a wide receiver at number 40 as expected, because they got Cooks, but at the same time, you look at a year or two down the line, like you were looking with the Raiders. What do the Texans have at wide receiver if they don't extend Will Fuller? Or maybe not anything,
Yeah.
So go ahead.
It's fascinating because really, when you mention Hamler and Cooks, what they have in common is that they'll both go over the middle and take a hit over the middle, and that's nice. But they're not guys that you're going to ask on the perimeter to out-leap people and rebound. That's not their game at all. So really, and that's really one of the things that when you look at the way that they play this game, I mean, Cooks could work out just fine because Deshaun Watson is very good at being able to throw the ball over people's heads and let the receiver run under it.
Right.
So that can work from that angle, but at those tight throws where you're going to have to go up and win the ball a little bit more, that's a tougher deal, and that's where Hopkins comes through.
Yes.
Hopkins is probably the most physical wide receiver in the league, the biggest bully in the league.
Yeah.
He uses moves. I mean, like, again, you can go to the RSP site and see the Jalen Ramsey Hopkins matchup from 2 years ago, and what you'll see is literally how punishing Hopkins can be and how much of what he does is about, really, mugging the cornerback and within the rules and being able to do it within the rules. And he and Ramsey were both great examples of players who play at that razor's edge of what's legal and illegal, and they figure out what is legal and illegal within the moment of that game by the official, by where they are on the field, by what they can get away with, and then they figure it out within that feeling out period, and then they run with it. And that's what makes them both great. And Hopkins is great for that reason. And there's no player on the Houston Texans, and there's few players in the league who do it like Hopkins.
Well, I just think that when you say that, I'm thinking of Denzel Mims, and I was talking to JJ Zacharyson on his show about this today. That I like the way that Mims is so willing to put his hands on his opponent.
Oh yeah,
put his hands on his opponent at the top of the stem. Put his hands on his opponent when the ball's in the air. Put his hands on the opponent to get to break a press, to get a release off a press. I want a receiver who's willing to be the aggressor, and he's also aggressive. Right? I get those visions of Brandon Marshall. It's just that underneath it all was why I was so smitten with Marshall. It's such an aggressive game that dictates to his opponent the terms that he's going to win on. So. We'll see. Hopkins in Arizona. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
The Texans moving the ball on third down. Watson needs someone like Hopkins because he doesn't just dump the ball off to Duke Johnson, because he doesn't just take what the defense gives him. That's just not in Deshaun Watson's nature. It's why he takes so many sacks. So he's going to miss Hopkins.
Yeah, and because also he can't throw the high velocity throw. So he's not the deep comeback, deep out, deep sideline curl thrower. Defenses dare him to do that because he's more of a rainbow thrower.
So it's going to be interesting. Tennessee, Indianapolis. So I don't know if Houston, helps them slightly in their quest to win the division again. And the Rams just feeling the pain so that next year they can have a chance to get things going in a new direction, only 2 years after a new direction. Okay, I want to talk about the Cam Akers RSP excerpt. Can I talk about that?
Okay.
Can we talk about that? It's fun because, first of all, folks, and again, if you don't already know about the RSP, this is as good a year as any, because now you have the time to
cure for boredom.
Well, and also just you have the time with the draft. It's the sporting event of the spring. Yeah. And the more you understand these players, the more you get them, the more interesting the draft becomes. The more interesting it is to watch them fall, and maybe see who is a lucky team or a sucker team, if you will. The more interesting it is to see what it reveals about an organization that they wanted a player, or especially a player, over another player who goes soon after that. And there's no better way than to learn these players than to read the RSP, purchase the RSP, and it'll make you a better fantasy player. But it'll just increase. I love this, Matt, because I think what you will do inherently is increase people's vocabulary about football, like the granularity of understanding everything that happens when you watch football. And I want to start with Incomplete Masterpiece. It's great. Like, you even have a way to encapsulate a player, and that's Cam Akers, Florida State running back, if you don't know him, folks. And I think where you and I might see eye to eye when it comes to rookie draft strategy, unless Cam Akers in an upset is like the first or second running back off the board, he's going to be available in the mid or maybe even late first rounds of rookie drafts. I think right now he's like 6th or 7th pick, and I don't see him leapfrogging any of the 5 or 6 guys in front of him. This is why I say, like, trading down from the top 3 picks to, say, the 5th, 6th, 7th pick is going to be a great move in rookie drafts this year, because I think I'd rather have Cam Akers than DeAndre Swift or J.K. Dobbins. Closer with Dobbins. But my point is, it's a lot closer than the capital you spend between like the 2nd rookie pick and the 7th rookie pick, which is where you can get Akers. But you call him an incomplete masterpiece, and you do this well with players, like just capture them, their nature. But masterpiece is high praise, and I know what this means for you, Matt Waldman. You mentioned Adrian Peterson like 3 or 4 times. And I know you wouldn't do that lightly. And you're not comparing him to Peterson in a way to say he's going to be as good as Peterson, but he reminds you Peterson's the back that comes to mind. So you really like Cam Akers.
Yeah. And the other back that I compared him to is the back I like even more than Adrian Peterson, and that's Marshawn Lynch. So, he runs with that kind of physicality. He's not maybe as punishing as either of those backs, but he's the type of back who can run through contact, great contact balance, excellent short area movement, the guy who can make you miss. And like Lynch, he's a good receiver. He can catch the ball. You throw him, in the red zone, contested plays, he can win up the seam. Those are all excellent things about his game. Oh, and he was a high school quarterback.
I know.
So they use him a lot to be able to throw the ball, which is nice too. The incomplete masterpiece about him is that he is a gifted pure runner, but he's not a refined runner in terms of knowing all the blocking schemes that he's going to have to learn in the NFL. Like if he goes to the Bills, that's going to be a great place for him because the Bills run predominantly gap. That's the kind of runs that he has. And again, if you're not familiar with a gap scheme, these are trap plays, counter plays, power, where they pull a guard and he can run behind that guard. And he only really has that choice, or maybe to bounce the play further outside if it doesn't work out. Whereas a zone play, usually you have 3 options: to cram, to cut back, or to bounce the play. And when you have those 3 options where you're trying to press towards a block and set up the defenders to determine one of those 3 options. Whereas with the gap play, it's more like, this is where you go, manipulate that crease as much as you can to be able to set up the block and then hit it hard and run through reaches or wraps or hits and do your damage in the open field, because we're going to marshal all our resources to that one point of attack. Cam Akers is great at that, but most NFL teams do not use gap blocking as a predominant form because it takes really athletic, big guys who are athletic along the offensive line to execute that well. And you're dominating the defense when you can run gap plays successfully. And there are not a lot of offensive lines that are good enough to dominate NFL defensive lines on a consistent basis running these types of plays. So as a result, he's going to have to learn a little bit more. And the way you run gap plays versus the way you run zone plays, it's an opposite mindset in terms of how you set them up. The steps are opposite. The directions that you take are opposite. So it's kind of like learning not only how to lead as a dancer, but also be Ginger Rogers as well and be as good as Ginger Rogers. So it's kind of like you got to be Fred and Ginger to be able to do this very well. And as we know, Ginger had to do it harder and in heels. So and backwards. So it's like Akers is good enough to learn, but it may take him some time. In addition to that, it's like you see the rest of his game. He's a hell of a pass protector. I mean, this is a guy who delivers, punches on defensive tackles and is able to literally like roll through his hips and hit them and stand them up. And that's impressive as all get out. But, again, he's a guy that maybe with the Colts, with the Bills, with the Chargers, these are the types of teams where a gap scheme would work out well. And he could see the field early because of his pass pro and of his receiving skill. But if he can really develop that zone skill, which most teams run, now you're looking at a guy who could be a potential top 10, top 15 running back in terms of production, and a potential Pro Bowl player.
Yeah, there's so much. You picked out so many of the things that I was going to touch on in your profile, and I just really want to give folks a feel. Well, the folks who haven't gotten RSP before, and by the way, this is free. I should have said over at Football Guys, you can read this whole Cam Akers write-up for free, and there's a Justin Jefferson one also, and you'll get to know these players. So you touch on a bunch of things that I wanted to say, because it's almost, I mean, I don't want to make you blush, Matt, but I feel like every team would draft better if they just read this. Not so much because they know who's good and who's not good, but they would know, like you point out simple things that I'm sure are simple to you for all of the attention to detail you have in the years you've been doing it, but for some reason is lost on some football teams, right? You say, hey, Akers is used to running as a fullback. He with a lead blocker. He's better when you do that, and yet you'll watch teams draft a player to do something completely different.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, and you're very accurate, and I mean, just you're not trying to slam. You're not. I can tell you don't start from a point of anything. You start with a point of zero about these players. You're just like, including what we all think, which is good that you keep yourself sequestered away from groupthink draft Twitter. He fumbles like Peterson. That's right. It's funny too that you even brought up Peterson in the negative.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to mention too that you used the term violent. See, Freudian. You use the term violent when you mentioned Peterson and his cuts, but it's true, and it's that feeling that a running back, and Lynch is the same way, that they can summon and intensely concentrate all of their will and energy in one moment and just impose their will on somebody. And the way that Akers explodes through those cuts is reminiscent of Peterson, in that he comes out of it at max energy, like max kinetic energy, bursting through the hole. It's like seeing the opening invigorates him and gives him some extra level of energy. You talk about how he's a good blocker and a good receiver. You even mentioned Austin Eckler again. I don't even think you realize it, but you're like gushing. You're about but I agree with you. You watch Akers and how he can handle himself, because there's a sense of timing, there's a sense of precision. I always make the log rolling comparison from the old lumberjack competitions of like understanding how your guy is going to react. Like you brought up Ginger Rogers too, and dancing. So and by the way, I wanted to let you know that the Chargers do like Justin Jackson, or at least Daniel Popper of The Athletic thinks they like Justin Jackson and still see Justin Jackson as the number 2, the 1-2 punch with Eckler. But like you said, we'll see. And you mentioned that he can play quarterback, and you even give specific plays. See, if a team reads the RSP, they're going to know exactly which trick plays to draw up with Cam Akers.
And that's the nice thing is, I mean, with the RSP, what you get is you kind of get a tour through the process. So you see how I stack rank all of these players in the different categories that I use, and it's transparent. So you see all the detail of how I define everything I look at.
Yeah.
You even see how I define the scoring system, and it's very specific, but it kind of takes you through in an entertaining way, so that you see cross comparisons of players before you even get to the lengthy profile about each player that puts it all together. So you kind of see how it's all made, how it's all compared, how it's all scored, and then even the overview of like each positional class. And with Akers, what's fun about looking at him is, I mean, it is how he fits, where he could go, where it could be very successful for him early on, and why I even mentioned the Buccaneers a few weeks ago when we talked about him, because if Arians does start running more gap plays, which he liked to do early on in his career or in his coaching career when he had David Johnson, you could see Cam Akers playing a David Johnson like role easily.
Sure.
And we need Cecil to do like a cartoon of Marshawn and Adrian Peterson planting their foot in the ground, because you'd see the earth crack with the violence that they have. And that's probably what he would do.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. And look, and I don't want to sound like I'm doing like an infomercial for the RSP, but I think everybody knows us well enough. No, but what's cool is, and this is one of the things, and I love that you mentioned Tampa as a destination, and it lines up with Jason Light saying today that they have as much faith as they've ever had in Ronald Jones. Word choice is interesting, right? They have as much faith as they've ever had in Ronald Jones, but he also said it won't stop them from taking a running back. And Arians has said he wants a 3-down back, and Cam Akers can be a 3-down back this year. So I love that you mentioned Tampa, but I think I want to say, and this is where I think it's just going to make you, and really I'm going to speak straight to like the football fan, and you want to understand vocabulary, and it allows you to language is a way to process the world, and the more a granular and wider range of language you can use to express about something, it's a way of showing that you're seeing all these discrete things coming together in reality. And you throw out the term throw by, Yeah, I really didn't know the technical term throw by until I read this. And it's a throw by, and you even give you give the most prominent example ever of a throw by in your when you paint the picture of Marshawn Lynch and the Beastquake run, using the momentum of a tackler with a stiff arm to just make them get off balance and dump them off the log again, to zonk them. So it was wonderful, and it made me really excited about Cam Akers and excited to talk about just all the things that go into it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's a term I got, it's again, a lot of these terms I get like curvy linear movement and throw by. These are terms that I learned from other people who are coaching players in the league, or coach players who are at the college level. Sean Miska works with Everson Griffith, the defensive end for the Minnesota Vikings, and he talked about the term curvy linear movement when it came to how people bend a corner without, hard cuts. And so Dalvin Cook does that really well. DeAndre Swift does that really well. And then throw by, I learned last year from Drew Lieberman, the coach of the Sideline Hustle, who was the assistant wide receiver coach for the Rutgers and works a lot with Mohamed Sanu and all of the, and he has videos with, DeAndre Hopkins. And last year he interviewed Sammy Watkins after his big first week where he executed a throw by on Jalen Ramsey, and it was like a perfect throw by, and it's the first time I've ever heard that term, and it's literally back here on my wall here, and I was like, you can apply it towards other things as well, and you realize, oh wow, okay, that's the Marshawn Lynch was a throw by. Steve Smith's play against the Bengals when he was a Raven was an awesome throw by, and so you learn these terms and you want to be able to apply them because it does describe, like you said, in a very granular way, something specific that's very special about those players, because when you can get the better the player is, the more detail you usually have on a player, or the more, and the other exception to that might be is if they have really high upside, low downside. Those guys are a little more complex, and maybe you kind of have to peel back all the layers to say they're really great in these situations, but they're not so great in these. But the less compelling the player is, the shorter my profiles tend to be.
Well, it's brush strokes, and you can just paint more with more brush strokes than you can with a thicker brush. I mean, it's the player, how they author their game, and you're just conveying that. So it's wonderful. And what's really great is I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of great work in individual areas in draft scouting. It's amazing how much has changed since you and I were doing this like 13, 14 years ago when we first encountered each other. It's just something that we wanted to do as like a compulsion. And now it's an entire field or discipline in talking about football. And I think a lot of people are good at certain areas of the portrait, but while you're painting with these granular brushstrokes, you're always thinking of a larger player, a larger picture. When you step back, like the Monet, and you see, I see it. I see the image. And that's, I think, what you should seek when you're doing draft scouting, is not to say this guy's going to be good and this guy's going to suck, or a team is smart if they take him and a team is not smart if they take him, because some of it's based on fit. And that's, again, where getting the picture, nailing the picture is important. Because if Cam Akers, they try to run zone with him right away and they don't give him lead blockers and he struggles and maybe still looks good in other facets of the game, and then on his second contract, he goes to a team that runs with a fullback, or he starts working with a coach who helps him understand zone running in a way like it'll make sense. Like, this stuff's not random. Like, when these amazing changes happen in careers, they take off or they go into a tailspin. There are reasons, and you can sometimes anticipate them by getting the player. And what's fun is 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about these players and more with the draft. So that'll be fun. In 2 weeks, we'll see who takes Cam Akers, et cetera. We'll see who takes another player. Brian Groh. Thanks everyone come out with the chat room, by the way.
Thank you.
Hope everyone's good out there. Hope everyone's safe. As always, it's no change. A lot of things that's happening right now, Matt, aren't different than they were before coronavirus. It was funny. The first time I said coronavirus on the show was like early March, and I even I think it was with Matt Williamson, and I was like, okay, I'm going to say it. It was like the 55-minute mark. We go off the rails on the couch, and I was like, I'm going to say coronavirus. But we care about the people in our community, and hopefully coronavirus drives you to care even more about the people in your community, whoever they are, in your household, in your life. And we appreciate you coming out and spending time with us. And it's wonderful. Brian Grow, one of the many people out there with us tonight. What do you think of Tyler Johnson round 3 or 4 for the Texans as a poor man's Hopkins replacement? And it doesn't have to be, I mean, we can talk about the Texans and the fit with the Texans, but I want to just tee it up this way because I've been duped before on Tyler Boyd, another Tyler, because I thought I didn't see enough of like the snappy suddenness, quickness, and I think I called Tyler Boyd like old man game. Like he was a young man, but he had old man game, and he had a lot more manufactured touches, I think, than Tyler Johnson does. But when I watch Tyler Johnson, hyper productive, but I just think about what he's going to look like against NFL corners and NFL coverage, and I wonder about the translation. And I think 3-4. I mean, if he goes around 3 or 4, I may rethink him, especially if he goes around 2, like Boyd. I have to give some deference to the teams, but I think he may be more of like a Kelvin Harmon 5th, 6th rounder. Where did you fall on Tyler Johnson in the really interesting 2nd, 3rd tier of wide receivers this year?
Yeah, he's in my 4th tier, and but his grade is such that he's what I would call I guess more of a contributing receiver, again, like Calvin Harmon. So that's kind of where I see him. I comped him to kind of a combination of Stevie Johnson and Alan Hearns. Neither of those guys were unbelievably fast, but they could find their way downfield and win the ball in the air at the height of their careers before they got hurt. Hearns, his first 2 years were very strong. I mean, we got to remember he had some strong years, but then he kept getting hurt, and now he's just a journeyman basically at this point because he can't stay healthy. But glue-handed, absolutely combative, someone who runs very good routes in terms of the short area or one-on-one. So he's going to be able to find space to get open as long as he's not forced to have to accelerate on a long runway to earn that separation. Because if that's the case, he's going to lose pretty much every time,
right,
unless the ball's hyper accurate and he earns that position late. But a lot of quarterbacks aren't confident enough to do that, and I don't think he's on Larry Fitzgerald's wavelength to use him in that regard. So yeah, good ball winner, good one-on-one, good zone route game, good red zone game, perimeter over the middle, just limited speed. So the point being is, if you have Will Fuller and you have Brandon Cooks, it could work out where he could be a decent addition to what you're doing. I just don't know if you're going to look at him and say, is he 700 yards of DeAndre Hopkins? Is he 900 yards of DeAndre Hopkins? Or is he 1,100 yards of DeAndre Hopkins? And I'd be more inclined to believe he's somewhere in the 700 to 900 yard range than the 900 to 1,100 yard range.
I mean, who really he needs, or who would best replace DeAndre Hopkins? But this is obviously a pipe dream. Would be someone like Jerry Jeudy. I see Hopkins. I see like not quite as fierce of Hopkins, but I see a lot, especially what I saw of Hopkins at Clemson. And CeeDee Lamb will work for anybody. Justin Jefferson would work too. What I'm thinking is 3rd and 7, right? Deshaun Watson needs someone on 3rd and 7. And these are your 3rd and 7 guys. Maybe if Van Jefferson wasn't hurt, he would be interesting. But again, you're also asking Watson to be a little more of a timing, take what the defense gives you.
Or you go with the big guys and you get T. Higgins, you get Mike Pittman. Those are 2 guys that clearly could be in that range that would be higher end versions of that kind
number 40. Now, I think one of Higgins or Pittman should be there at 40. Pittman may be more refined. Higgins just breathtaking at his concentration and catch radius at times. Rob Nordo also in the chat room, and we always I love that our conversations, Matt, always end up venturing off into a critique of you wrote for the business school at Georgia, so you know this all too well, plus the experience you've had out in the business world. Just a critique, let's say a critique of bad management. And Rob Nordo says that this is the draft we look back on in 5 years, shaking our heads on how teams misevaluate so many prospects, even with the Rona factored in. And what's funny is when I read that, this is what I read, because I can't remember what team it was. Michael Lombardi was talking about this. I can't remember what team it was, but they were saying they were kind of excited. It was the Ravens, I think, that they were excited about the draft because it would be just like the 80s or the 70s. Like we've done this before, right? Like there are people in the NFL that can remember when what this amazing, challenging draft is going to be was just the draft.
Yeah.
It was just like there wasn't visits and pro days and measurables and all of this science. It was just so when Rob posted that comment in the chat room, what I thought is, yes, they're going to mess it up, but they're going to mess it up because they're going to choke, because they're going to psych themselves out because executives are not anything without support staff. Support staff actually are the MVPs, not the executives. There's a lot of, through Adam Schefter, fretting. There's a lot of fretting around the league about, what if there's a drop connection where you have to depend on this technology, which every draft, the vision, the picture of the draft is the phone call from the team headquarters to the draft. So they always rely on some telephony or some sort of transmission line, but they're freaking out. And I feel them gripping. Do you feel them gripping? Does this make sense to you when you think about the NFL decision makers, at least most of them?
Yeah, I can totally see how that's a possibility where they're kind of flipping out, and there's less data to go on. So it only makes sense that the Ravens would be looking forward to this, because they define things for their scouts probably better than most. So they're like, whatever, we had it right on Lamar Jackson, that we were able to trade down 2-3 times in that round to be able to get the guy we wanted, and look what happened there. So they're confident in their process. So you're going to see some real winners with certain teams, and you're going to see some other teams that are like, well, their owner may be the guy who likes to come over the top and say, this is what we want and this is what we like, but they don't know anything about these players in the way that they would during a visit, or any of the other information that would come out that we don't see now, because ESPN or Fox or anybody else isn't reporting the kind of stuff that they usually glean information from and go and then run over the top and overrule their support staff who's done all the work. So the support staff's really going to be leaned on more, except for maybe there's going to be a few teams that even have more inane,
yes,
reasons for why they want a guy at the last minute that everybody's going to be scratching their head about. I'll add another guy to the Houston mix. Quintez Cephas is a guy I keep talking about, but he's so good at the top of his stem beating people up.
Yes.
And he's such a good ball tracker. I could totally see him being that guy in that offense. And I'd be happy for Deshaun Watson, but I'd be kind of sad for Quintez Cephas and the fact that he'd have to deal with Bill O'Brien as well.
Right. So. Right. Cephas is another one that, again, there's a discrete category that a box I like to check or not, is a wide receiver who's willing to put his hands on his opponent. And it's funny because, and sometimes it can go hand in hand with players that can't generate separation as well, strictly by just authoring their route. But that's okay if you do it in an effective enough way that it seems like it'll translate. And Cephas definitely does that. And
he's a boss, man.
Yeah, and he goes up for the ball like a condor, just at the catch point, he's really, really imposing.
He's a great ball tracker too. He's unbelievable, tracking the ball over his head. Yeah, I just call him Chief. I just think that, I think he's going to be the guy in this draft. Like when I'm drafting, he's the guy I'm reaching for. I just don't give a darn. That's the guy I want.
Yeah. Well, and you won't have to reach because of the 40 time.
Yeah.
And we'll see. Yeah. That he's a fun one. And that's one of the things that's cool about this draft is this wide receiver class. I will say, I said something that made people unhappy. I said, when I really dove into the closer examination on this wide receiver class, it didn't quite live up to the expectations that the talk had created, if only because you speak about incomplete masterpieces. A big chunk of that, like number 6 to 15 tier, are guys that have a very wide range of outcomes because of the incompleteness of their game, and probably some of them are going to grow in those spaces in their game, will fill in, and some of them won't. And it could be just based on which organizations they fall into or what kind of coaching they get into.
Look
but
you being the realist that you are this year with this, like,
right?
You're like,
well, because the reality is, but that's what's so great. Kyle Posey, who's covering the 49ers, was talking about Brandon Ayuk and said, 4 organizations you could see him hitting and 4 you could see him not. And based on how you anticipate that he'll be used. And I think there's a number of wide receivers, unlike, say, a Justin Jefferson, where it's straightforward.
Yeah.
Unlike even Michael Pittman, I think is a somewhat straightforward evaluation in terms of his ability to translate in some fashion, no matter what he's asked to do. But the reality is, and this is why every team should have an RSP, right? NFL teams, if you're out there and freaking out right now, get the RSP and just have that in there. So before you draft someone, is he actually good at what we want to ask him to do?
Yeah, I would joke if they're worried about if the owner's worried about whether or not the transmission's going to be right, wait till he has to like navigate a PDF bookmark. I don't know if that's going to work out very well, but we do have some guy. I have heard there are a couple of GMs that have gotten the RSP in the past. So good. and I'll just say that one of them liked Alexander Madison a lot too.
Yeah. Well, although the Vikings are probably going to sign Dalvin Cook to an extension.
True.
Let's see. What else went on this week? What else happened this week? Not much. I mean, really, things have slowed down. No, it's true. Yeah. Usually we'll get some trick. DeAndre Washington signed with Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if the Sammy Watkins restructure had happened before or after we recorded last Thursday, but the Chiefs are keeping Sammy Watkins. Instead of getting $14 million this year, he's getting $9 million this year, but he can earn up to $6 million or $7 million in incentives.
I like that.
And then incentives are like, 65 catches and the team goes to the AFC title game, he gets like another $1 million or $1.25 million. Or if he gets like up to $1 million or $1.25 million in per game active bonuses. So he might break even on $14 million, which tells me the Chiefs value him. Should they value him just based on the beginning and end of his season?
Yeah, I think they should. I mean, I think I think what they probably saw was this is a guy that has who worked hard in the offseason, and he had some moments, but he just couldn't stay healthy. And their thing to him was probably like, look, Sammy, here's the deal. You've been on multiple teams. You haven't been able to stay healthy. We want to keep you. We see the potential in you. We know what you're capable of doing when you're on the field, but we just can't pay you this kind of money if you're not going to be on the field on a consistent basis and not delivering on the way that we know you're capable of. So, how about you stay with us because we value you and what you're important doing, but we give you the chance to earn that money back that we want to take from you, but you have to prove it. Can you live with that? And because I honestly think you go somewhere else, you're not going to be a part of, you could be a part of a dynasty. Do you really want to not be a part of a dynasty here?
Right.
You're going to get to catch the ball from Patrick Mahomes.
Exactly.
Year 3 that you'll have a chance to be with him. And we have all the pieces in place. We value you this way. Just be realistic about yourself. And we'll pay you more if you do well. And I think he responded to that. I think he did.
And it's funny too. Speaking of pay you more if you do well, because next year he's going to be up for a new contract, only 27. So it's kind of that Randall Cobb situation where you're young enough that even after your second contract, you still have a lot of earning potential. So we'll see. But I think the Chiefs value him, and they brought back DeMarcus Robinson too. So they're keeping the band together on offense.
I like it.
Yeah, and Mecole Hardman, his time will come. They also signed Ricky Seals-Jones.
I know that was interesting.
Why not?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if Travis Kelce gets hurt, then Ricky Seals-Jones, very interesting because you can see he translates. I mean, it translates, and what Patrick Mahomes can do. I mentioned that Justin Jackson item to you, and folks, Justin Jackson before he got hurt last year, I know he didn't to truly force a committee with Austin Eckler, but in the first 2 weeks he had something like 12 carries for 120 yards. I mean, he was breaking off runs. To be honest, watching Justin Jackson, I remember reading what you wrote about him in the RSP and thinking, okay, this guy has a chance to greatly outperform the class of running back he was considered in the draft, but I think he's even been better than that. Yeah. I think athletically he's translated as well as you possibly could have expected.
I comped him to a poor man's Jamal Charles, and I think that there's elements of his game that if you were to think of Jamal Charles, maybe not quite as athletic as what he was, but with the movement skills, the ability to win after the catch and the balance and the vision, Justin Jackson flashes a lot of that.
Have you read his Twitter? Have you ever checked out his Twitter?
Yes, I have. He's fun.
I like Justin Jackson.
Yeah,
I have a feeling that Justin Jackson, we would enjoy hanging out with Justin Jackson and have some very
invigorating. Man.
What?
He's fluent in French.
Of course he is.
Yeah.
They would love him here in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just fantastic. I'm just looking to see here. Another writer from the Athletic, Zach Kiefer, said look for more Nyheim Hines. That just makes sense. Philip Rivers is going to allow. I mean, Hines might not be quite the route runner that Eckler is, but as far as impact on a game as a mismatch, because you just see there were so many times last year when Hines looked like the fastest guy on the field, and I just don't understand how you don't get the ball. Go ahead.
So let's turn this around a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
You've got the Bloom 5. You've got the Bloom 100.
Yeah, sure. Please. Yeah.
So this is an annual institution. It's such a great resource for anybody who is a fantasy player to get in the mind of Sigmund Bloom and see, kind of where he views these players playing out for rookie drafts.
Right.
So I want to know, who was the player that you rated higher than you expected to rate heading into this?
I mean, Akers is definitely one that I would not have expected that. I mean, when the final version is going to come out Monday, I might do it in 2 installments, one Friday, one Monday. Maybe if I can't get it all done, it'll come out Monday. But I really liked Akers as much as Swift, as much as Dobbins, even Taylor, because we're talking about fantasy football, which makes it kind of narrow and a little more boring than the larger NFL application. But there's Taylor in an ideal situation could be the most valuable fantasy football running back out of this class, but we'll see. We'll see where Taylor lands. And I think Akers could absolutely be the most productive back out of this class. And going into seeing them, I didn't expect him to be able to outpace them. But Denzel Mims is probably the guy that really emerged out of the pack. Because I think that what I try to do when I do the Bloom 100, Matt, is think about what are the decisions we're going to really have to make. Because we can put lists and rank these guys 1 to 24 or 1 to 36 or rank them within positions. But what we really can look at is, especially knowing the ADP, and we're going to pre-draft ADP, and it's going to change, and we'll learn it as it goes along. A lot of people doing great work. It's amazing all the information at our fingertips now in fantasy football. So you're going to know, if someone could tell you, I have the 7th pick in the league, with this many teams and these settings with scoring and lineups, and you say you're probably going to be choosing between these 3 or 4 players, right? And you're like, here's who I would take, and that's the actionable advice of the work that we do when it comes to dynasty fantasy football. And Denzel Mims is that guy. If you have a pick in the 8 to 12 range, you're going to be choosing between Mims and Chenault and Ayuk and maybe Jefferson. I think Jefferson's going to level off in that 6 to 8 range because I expect him to be the 4th receiver off the board. And Mims is the guy, and it is because of that aggressiveness. Maybe the others. Go ahead.
First time in a while that you, Cecil, and I all like a player with that much fervor.
Yeah. And to me,
who's not normally seen as a marquee player until later.
No, I think, what's fun about Mims too is I hope he can overcome the Baylor wide receiver thing,
Sure.
But I think what he's going to do is what's the part that I think is even the better actionable advice and the tougher part to not just to nail, but to stick your neck out is the fade, and it works. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't work out. Last year I was so lukewarm about David Montgomery because of his burst. And we're not declaring anything yet, but I see a lot of the same things with Zach Moss too. And I also was so sour on Marcus Mariota that it soured me on AJ Brown, which it's like the zonk on let's make a deal. So it's tough, but the guys that have emerged, KJ Hamler, it's so funny, man. Before I watched KJ Hamler, just hearing what the people who like him the most said about him, what I was expecting and what I saw, I almost felt angry, because I really think that for the tactical element that Hamler's going to be able to contribute, I wonder about Devin Duvernay having some of the same, at least in terms of stretch. What's that?
I'd much rather have Duvernay.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and the part is okay, can Duvernay break someone's ankles in a route the way that Hamler can? No, but Duvernay is just a rugged customer when it comes to clashing on the field that Hamler isn't. And I think in the NFL that amplifies or magnifies your impact. It's a multiplier, The competitive toughness, I know, is a term I've seen. I think the Draft Network guys use it a lot. I really think it's a discrete way to think about a quality of a player that, Dante Pettis is another a guy who always comes to mind when I watch Dante Pettis play. It's like, beautiful player, but finesse player.
Right.
And that can be a knockout factor sometimes. And there's a part of it, the great emotional divide that you wrote about. So it's those guys, I think Zach Moss is probably going to be a guy I'm much lower on than everyone else. I think Chase Claypool is probably one of those guys, unless he's announced as a tight end. And I love that you said he'd be the number 2 tight end.
He grew on me, but I know why you feel the way you do, because I didn't like him at first either. And he grew on me. But I feel you. I'd much rather have him as a tight end than I would. Is it really that much of a difference if they're both going to play inside? Is like Matt Caraccio and Paul Perticchese said to me last night during one of our fun conversations. And I'd say, yeah, the answer is probably not, because it's really the same thing. It's just he's going to get paid less,
Right.
Name him tight end. So
well, but it's usage though. I mean, what it comes down to is what the kind of player he's going to match up against. And the vision that a team has for, we want to have him on a linebacker, or we want to have him on a safety, or versus we want to have him against a corner, because sometimes I even see in my head, Matt, like visions of Bucky Hodges, but he's faster than Bucky Hodges. Yeah. And maybe that's all the difference. Yeah. Maybe that's it. I mean, maybe if Bucky Hodges could run in the 4.4s, he wouldn't have become Bucky Hodges, and who knows,
I still have I have. My wife got me some 50th birthday balloons, and they're like 3 of them are still hanging in there. Like the 0 fell down like within 3 days, but the 5's still going strong. Like it hasn't budged. So it's kind of like these are I feel like I'm carrying the balloon for Bucky Hodges still, even though I know that it's never going anywhere. But
I know. Well, I mean, we have those balloons. Yeah. That's great.
So who shocked you? Like, who was a player that, like, maybe they're not at the top of the Bloom 100. Maybe they're at the very bottom, but they're a guy that you would have like, he's on here, and I'm like excited about him, even if it's not like you're not saying to fantasy players, you got to draft this guy, but you can't wait to see how this unfolds with him, because he's like your sleeper, your unknown, under the radar kind of guy.
Well, the Monmouth running back. Guerrero,
yeah.
I mean,
the jet
speed, and of course with the small school guys, you wonder how much it's going to translate. But we can go back through our files and remember those players that, when there's just a moment. You talk about when you said shock, I just think of the arresting feeling when you see that a player's acceleration is just something that the other players sometimes aren't even contemplating.
Yes.
And there were those moments with him.
He has Philip Lindsay type of vision in his game.
Well, I think that he could be really fascinating as a guy that greatly outproduces what a team invests in him. But like Philip Lindsay, it means they're going to have to continue to prove it over and over and over again.
All right. Here's another one I want to know. Yeah. Who's a guy that you really want to like, because there's certain aspects of his game, but you just know you can't, like Jawan Jennings.
Oh, yes. That's a great one.
I absolutely love aspects of his game. I thought he was going to be Brandon Marshall, because he looked like he was 225 the way he plays. And then you find out he's 208, but then he gained the weight. But his hands aren't in uniform position enough to hold on to the ball as much as he should. But when he does make tough catches, they're unbelievable tough catches. And he's got that great first step to make the first man miss, and he breaks a crap tackles.
Yeah.
And blocking is unbelievable. Like, to me, I look at him and go, you're an AFC North receiver. Like, dude, you're going to be okay. But he's got to get his hands fixed, because he's slow, and he's got to get his hands fixed. And if he can fix his hands, oh my God, he's so much fun.
Yes. I have my notes on him are that he's just so strong and stubborn and tough in the way he plays the game that he wins you over. And he presents a nice, so there's being a big receiver, but then there's presenting a big functional target.
Yes.
And he does that very, very well. And he has good ball skills, but he goes over the middle the same way that we used to joke about Marshawn Lynch, like wanting to take on the defense 1-on-11. Yes. That's kind of how he is about going over the middle. Yeah. He likes it. But you're right. There's this potential fatal flaw of how slow he is. I mean, his workout kind of matches that. And I think that Zach Moss is another guy that has that quality. Just watch Zach Moss pass block. Like, that's fun. That's a fun reel.
Leave him alone with people.
Yeah.
They're like, I mean, defensive end, yeah, you can handle them. No big deal.
And he jolts guys. I mean, he in a way that he understands, like that he's like rubbing his hands together, like Clinton Porter, like I get to pass block.
Do you know who he is? Do you know who he is? I think he's Travis Henry with receiving skill, which is like, you could get something out of that as long as, it's just not, it's not sexy,
It's not,
I
mean, there are times that he just looks, I mean, David Montgomery comes to mind. I can remember, I'm trying to remember a few other backs, because the problem with him is that his burst, Zach Moss's burst, it just, everything tightens up so much in the NFL. At least with Travis Henry, he had that foot frequency, and he would kind of scoot, and he would generate some momentum. But I just feel like when you watch Zach Moss and you picture him, it's the same sensation I had watching Dave Montgomery last year.
Do you
picture him at NFL speed? Go ahead.
Two more players I want to touch with you about. All right. One of them is the guy that seems to be the talk for everybody, Antonio Gibson. What are your thoughts on Antonio Gibson?
I mean, he makes your pulse quicken a little bit when he has the ball in his hands. And the thing is, Tony Pollard might just be really good at football and really take to football, because it's not fully enough realized with Gibson. When you think of him as a running back in any kind of core running back role, it's not quite fully realized. When you think about him as a receiver, it's not quite fully realized. And we should be careful not to make the leap and think, well, he'll just learn how to do those things. So you do wonder exactly how you harness that. But I mean, I'm more excited about him than like Lynn Bowden, or I mean, as one of these open-ended. I mean, and the thing is, he presents that same kind of proposition in some ways as some receivers that are going to go a lot higher in the draft. But he has that speed and that build. I mean, if teams are looking for speed, and we'll figure it out, he's a perfect 3rd or 4th round pick.
He's funny because there's a guy who follows me on Twitter. His name's Eric Mack, and Eric always has a pretty good beat on running backs. Like I respect his thoughts on players. When it comes to that position, he does a good job of evaluating them. And every year he always is kind of DMing me about certain things. And this year he was like, I think Antonio Gibson is just a bigger version of what Eric Metcalf was in the league. And I was like, that's interesting,
Yeah, I could see that.
Would you, and he's a big Ravens fan. So I was like, what do you think? Do you think he could coexist with what's currently there with Hill? Do you like Hill? What do you think about all that? And he's like, yeah, I mean, I think that could be something that might work, and it's interesting. So, and because I'm more of a send AJ Dillon to the Ravens. Please send AJ Dillon to the Ravens. That would be fun. But the other guy I want to ask you about, this is the guy that I keep hearing he's going to have a better NFL career than his college career. And when you watch him return the ball, he's unbelievable as a return specialist, and that's Donovan Peoples-Jones. But I didn't like him as much as I wanted to.
Every time I look at the rankings and say, "Is this really what I mean?" I really could do like 10 different versions of the rankings and release them at once and say, "This is the range of how I feel about these players." But I move him down, and I mean, some of it's quarterback play, but you can only hide in that so much. I see parts of his game, ball tracking, and I see the toughness, I see the determination, but I don't know that his speed and quickness is going to be imposing. I don't know if he's going to be more than a slot receiver. I don't know if he's going to be a guy that has the nuance to his game to play outside. And I mean, it's hard to see the picture of exactly how he's going to come into focus and see that he's going to be adding a lot of value. So yeah, I think that the luster, and it's another thing with the workouts. I think the workouts for him created this expectation of, maybe there's a lot more there than what Michigan got out of him. But what you've taught us so well over the years is you have to have skills to unlock traits. Traits just remain up in the tower, behind the bars, without skills. And with wide receiver, I mean, this is what we'll see about N'Keal Harry and all these other guys. And then the chapters are always written. What's wild about this stuff is the more you do this, you see that over the course of a player's career, you'll be right and wrong about them. Like parts of their game where you're like, this is a problem, come to fruition, and then something else changes, and then other parts of their game come to fruition, like Devontae Parker. Always wonderful, man. And we're going to be back next week. We're going to be back all night through the first round. No technology problems here. We're older, but we're not worried about whether it's going to give out on us.
If I have to get some cats to run on a hamster wheel to get the electricity going, we'll be all right.
Yeah, and we will probably have the appearance of some cat that night. Thank you, everybody, always. It's wonderful to spend time with you. It's wonderful to spend time with Matt Waldman and out there in our Football Guys universe. Thank you, everybody. Please stay safe, wash your hands, and get on that mat.